Omni is Omnicom's new precision marketing platform. Essentially what it is taking a view of the customer, the consumer, building up from first-party data, using third-party data, bringing all that together, and then using that to inform both the creative side of the house, messaging, as well as the media side of the house, which is where those consumers actually live. All together, bringing that together around the customer profile is going to yield outcomes. So using messaging and media to drive outcomes on a single platform called Omni.
So John, how much of this is packaging and how much of it is kind of in development, and what's the roadmap? Because you're using some of these tools now, I would assume.
Yeah, we've been, in much of what you've known as Analect, so those tools have existed for 9 years so far. So we batched all the Analect tools together, brought in dynamic messaging databases from the precision marketing group side of the house, most of which, if not all of which, have been in use before, along with some new tools that we've been developing, like what we call the inventory graph, which is we've mapped quite a bit of programmatic inventory and trying to understand, okay, how do you put the right message in front of the right person at the right time? Well, it takes a platform, which is Omni, to do that by bringing it all together, and all these tools that we've been previously using with a couple new ones, but most of this stuff has actually been in use for years. We think we can do that and drive those outcomes that I talked about before.
And tell us about the identity graph and why that matters.
Well, the identity graph is really at the core of all of this, which is if you don't understand your consumers, your customers, it's very hard to target them with a message. It's very hard to figure out exactly where they are and what they're doing and what they're interested in. So identity and this idea of bringing it down to the subatomic level, which is individual consumers, allows us to ladder back up into clusters of segments, of behavioral clusters, of kind of whatever you want. But it really starts with that identity graph.
And who are your partners on the data side?
Oh, there's all kinds of partners on the data side, from Comscore to Experian to LiveRamp to Neustar, IRI. There's like 100 different data partners that we rely on to bring this all together.
And when you guys do business pitches, or you present yourself in business development, what is the Omnicom offering different than some of the other big holding companies? And we've certainly heard about developments and big acquisition, IPG, and of course the efforts of the M platform. How do you define your offering?
Well, I think a lot of our peers are following into a really good idea, which is putting the customer at the center. What we are doing that's different is tying that all the way through the customer journey, from the initial message all the way through the purchase funnel, awareness, consideration, and driving ultimately purchase. The way you do that, start with messaging, start with dynamic messaging, customizing content for an individual, and then using that content and targeting it as appropriately, both on and offline, all around the web, television, radio, and then figuring out, okay, what's the yield? How do we drive actual behavior? And measuring that. So Omni is the platform that brings that all together. And no other holding companies really put it all together the way that Omnicom has.
And finally, tell us about creative versioning, and you guys of course have fantastic creative agencies. You have all these clients. What is the opportunity, or what does that mean in terms of developing versioned creative to people?
Well, I think this idea of creative in general is key to Omnicom's strategy going forward. I would offer up that we have the most highly awarded creative firms in the business, bar none, whether that be digital firms or more traditional firms. The idea of keeping creativity at the center of all of the offerings is absolutely critical. It's my opinion that you could have the best targeting scheme in the world, but if you don't have the messaging right, it just isn't going to work. So the idea of having a workflow or creative versioning is a component of this. The idea of having creative inspiration tools that are not just Excel spreadsheets full of numbers talking about clusters of people on the ID graph is part of this. These creative directors think qualitatively. They think in terms of inspiration. They think in terms of colors. They think in terms of words. it's sight, sound, and motion is what television is. And so we are not just looking at workflow, so creative versioning, but inspiration and also the tools to actually assemble the creative and activate it dynamically. All of that's included in Omni.